Welcome to the 5-Star Podcast, where we talk about all things Toronto real estate. Episode 18. How's it going, everybody?
Good. Hot day.
Hot day. You know what's hot? All these guys in this room. This is the first time where all 6 of us are here.
Guys. Oh, true.
And we have a guest here, Mr. Andy. How you doing?
Good. How you guys doing?
Good. Why don't you do a quick intro on yourself?
Sure. Yeah. My name's Andy Tran, and I run a company called Suite Additions. So basically what we do is focus on GTA real estate and helping folks do design and permits for their properties, mostly investors, but homeowners as well, owner-occupiers. And really the focus is to help folks convert single-family homes into multi-units in a legal manner. So we've been doing that for about 8 years now, 9 years. Backgrounds in architecture, so it kind of lends itself very well to some of the things that we're doing right now. And with the policy changes, with real estate, the economy, where things are going, it seems like it's making a lot of sense. And a lot of people are actually utilizing these new policies to make better use of the properties.
For sure, yeah. So this topic today, we're talking about laneway housing, garden suites. So it's great of you to come here and give us some insight because you do this for a living. Whereas we just, try to sell it. So you are definitely the expert here. So before we get into it, why do you think laneway housing and garden suites are so important in Toronto?
Well, right now, especially, we keep talking about the population growth and, the shortage of housing, right? And especially with, this is actually a pretty important topic because with Doug Ford, him implementing that new clause or that new law in where every property can actually have up to 3 units, right? And I think in Toronto, they can actually go up to 5. Is that right?
I think maybe Andy, you can in certain zones, right? You can get up to 5.
Yeah.
5
so
units.
Their policy is so just to kind of back up on that bill that you mentioned, Bill 23. So that's a provincial mandate across every municipality in Ontario to allow a minimum of 3. Now, exactly how that city is going to implement it, they leave it up to the cities to say, can it be 3 within the existing house? Do you build it with a garden suite? But the idea is that they need to allow a minimum of 3 with at least 1 garden suite. Toronto has there's a few cities that have taken a step beyond that. So Toronto is one of them, where they do have what's called a multiplex policy now. That's basically been in place for several months, and they allow you to convert a single family home to 4, plus potentially a laneway or a garden suite. So you add that up and it's going to be 5.
5, man.
That's crazy.
That's a lot. Yeah.
That's a lot. That's great.
And what is the difference between a laneway and a garden suite?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of people wonder about that. A lot of times people use them interchangeably. Really, the only difference is the structure is exactly the same. The only difference is that with a garden suite, it's in a lot that does not have access to an alley or a laneway, basically, right? So it could be an interior lot, it could be a corner lot, but there's nothing behind there. Whereas with a laneway, it's very similar in terms of the bylaws. However, you can have access directly from the laneway. Whereas with a garden suite, you need to provide access from the front of the house.
Yeah, because you need a decent sized backyard.
I was just thinking that too.
Right?
Yeah, the lot size has got to be pretty huge.
What's the minimum lot size that you?
You know what? You guys would be surprised. We've made it work on some pretty small lots, especially here in Toronto. They are very progressive, and things are very tight in a lot of properties, especially the downtown area. I do a lot of work on the East End, and you'd be surprised.
How small?
Semi-detached lots. Sometimes
20 feet.
20 feet, 20 by 80, 20 by 100.
Wow, that's tight.
You can make it work. Although sometimes you have to kind of work within the bylaws. And if you can't meet the bylaws, you might have to get a minor variance, right?
Right.
So it's you got to get creative, basically.
So even under 20?
Yeah. I haven't worked on anything under 20, but I've seen other projects where they've made these laneway houses or garden suites as low as 15 feet wide.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. Really?
Yeah. So, it's just the nature of it, right? Toronto being such a high density city, and basically, every square inch counts.
Yeah, that's the trade-off. You get smaller space, but you're living in the city, right? So, yeah.
The commute time's supposed to be cut down a little bit.
So if someone was going to pursue this, what is the easiest entry for them? What is the lowest cost? Would that be a basement suite, or what are the options?
Yeah. So in terms of sort of lowest hanging fruit, I would say would be to convert your basement, right? As you all know, there's already a lot of basement apartments already done. A lot of them are illegal, but it's just kind of like the natural progression of a single family home. You have, let's say, a basement that's underutilized. Maybe they're using it for storage. Maybe they're using it for a rec room. And the first thing they're going to do is, hey, if money's tight and I need a mortgage helper, or, I want to have an extra unit for a family member or nanny, whatever it is, this structure is already there. You just have to separate it, put in a kitchen, put in a bathroom. Now, if you want to make it legal, then you have to go through the permits and you have to.
I was just going to
that.
ask you that.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
What's the difference between a legal versus an illegal suite?
I'll ask you guys. What do you think is the difference? If I had to ask you, if there was one thing that you had to, just one item that you had to say that would make it a legal or an illegal unit, what would that be?
Fire
Just
separation.
So
Egress,
a second exit out from your unit.
Egress.
Okay, so
So the
second
egress.
I heard
Fire
fire separation.
separation.
Anything
Yeah.
else?
Yeah. Window sizes.
Yeah. Okay. So those are all things that are required and are all very important, and all of them put together are the things that you need to ensure, you need to implement to ensure that it's legal. Now, if there's one thing that determines whether it's legal or illegal, okay, a little bit of a trick question, it's documentation.
Oh,
Okay.
It's
no,
paper.
that's it. That's
Yeah.
Permits.
Permit.
Like you need to have, if somebody says that, we have a legal unit here, the only way to prove that 100% is if there's paperwork.
Yeah.
Right. Because if, let's say, a builder or a renovator said, this is legal. Well, maybe they did everything that you guys mentioned. Maybe they did the fire separation. Maybe they did the egress and all that stuff, which is important. But they didn't go through the permit process. And if they didn't go through the permit process, and let's say a neighbor complains and the city files a report, knocks on the door, you would have to shut it down, right? So that's why we focus on legal, especially because we work with a lot of investors where they may not be owner occupiers, right? So they're not keeping an eye on things, right? And then you have grandma across the street that's lived there for 60 years, right? She's like, there's all these people coming in and out. She calls the city. Now, in my experience, it's less of an issue in Toronto because it's just so common and people are kind of used to it. But in a lot of the other smaller towns that we work with, not towns, but a lot of the smaller cities like Hamilton and Kitchener, it is more of an issue where they do get shut down if it's not done legally, right? Yeah. But we think for the additional cost, no matter what, whether you do it legal or illegal, your renovation cost, if you want it to be safe, it's going to be the same. So for the additional several $1,000s, a lot of people want to make sure that they do it properly, right? And then they can ensure that down the road when they're selling the property, they don't have to hide anything. Everything's done legal. Here's all the paperwork. Yeah. So the reason why I mentioned this is that, when you guys are looking at properties for your clients, and then people, the listing agents, they say it's legal, then you just want to make sure that you have paperwork.
Proper documentation.
Yeah.
So how long does that process take from making it illegal or completing it to making it legal?
So there's a few steps to it, right? So once we typically, we schedule a date to visit the site, take measurements, take photos, collect all the data. We go back to the office, work on a conceptual design, and through that process, we finalize our design, finalize the permits. That could be anywhere between several weeks to, a month or two, depending on the client and kind of the communication. And after that, it's up to the city, but the city has a mandate to get back to us within, in Toronto anyways, 10 days. A lot of times they are delayed. So they'll get back to us and they would typically ask us for some revisions and changes. Then we would get it back to them. But the whole process, I would say, from the time we visit the site to the time we get permits, typically we're finding in the 10 to 12 week mark.
That's not too bad.
It's not that bad.
And how much is the application fee and the permits and all that?
So depending on the municipality, for a second suite ranges anywhere between $500 to $1,000, right? So it's not bad. Yeah. And essentially all the development fees have been eliminated for this type of stuff. Nice. So that's really encouraging smaller investors and homeowners to kind of go through the process. Whereas in the past, when you were to actually duplex a property, the development charges would be very high, right? So that would discourage a lot of homeowners from going through the legal route.
Was that new? You were talking about the DC charges and whatnot. Was that cost being eliminated? Is that something new?
Well, for second units or duplexes, as people call them, no, that's been That's been eliminated for a long time.
Okay.
But the more recently is the 3 units and the 4 units.
The third
Yeah.
and fourth.
Yeah.
Right.
So I can talk about that if you guys want that multiplex policy and why
Yes.
it makes so
Yeah.
much sense.
Please do.
If you guys want to.
Please, yeah. Please
Absolutely.
elaborate. Yeah.
So the cool thing about that multiplex policy is that it's as we mentioned, it's for up to 4 units plus the 1 garden suite or laneway house, which is 5 units in total.
Is
Now-
that a proper like R1 zoning, or is that like
Yeah, it
not
could
to get
be-
too technical? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's important, like for your audience to be aware of it, right? So there's several zones in Toronto. They don't actually separate like R1, R2. A lot of other municipalities do.
Okay.
So in Toronto, it's RD for residential detached, RS for semi, RT for townhouse, RM for multi-residential, and then there's R, which is a general high density area. So if you're down on, I don't know, let's say Ossington and Bloor, or you're at Danforth and Pape, like that's typically the R zone, right? So that was always traditionally higher density. Now this multiplex policy that has been implemented or passed council just a few months ago, that is actually across the board. So that's everywhere within Toronto proper, like the six boroughs, right, or the six cities. So it covers detached, it covers semi-detached, and end unit townhomes, if you can fit it.
Only in unit townhomes.
Yeah, because
Because you can't walk back
Yeah,
there,
that's
right?
true. Makes sense.
Like a ladder from
well, you could do multiple units within the townhouse, like an interior townhouse. You can do multiple. You just can't do a garden suite because then you can't legally access.
Makes sense.
Right? So the interesting thing about this new policy is that there's a bunch of things that actually make it makes a lot of sense, because you're potentially exempt from development charges for 4 units, right? In the past, it would have been like $400,000, something like that, if you were to convert a single family to and that would basically just kill the project.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
numbers wouldn't work,
It's too
right?
expensive.
And so and then there's also a deferral for the garden suite or laneway house on the development charge if you don't sever the property within, I can't remember the time frame, something like 20 years, then you're not required to pay that development charge. Now you can't legally sever it anyways. So effectively there's no development charges. So that's one aspect. Parking has been removed. So that was always a point of contention for us in the past whenever we did projects, is that we didn't have the necessary parking, or the parking space was too small. We would have to go apply for a minor variance. And then the neighbors would basically come out and stop the project, right? Or like, even though they're not, even though it's not related to parking, they're going to use that as kind of like, an excuse to stop the project because they don't like the density or they don't like the multiple units, right? So essentially the development charges are removed for 4 units. You can also potentially get commercial loans for 5 units and up, right? Because anything 4 units and under is considered residential.
Okay.
And so that's another big aspect of it. So CMHC financing potentially. So a lot of reasons make this kind of 5 unit very appealing.
So 4 units plus the garden suite is allowed. You don't
Correct.
need, it's not commercial, because usually commercial is considered 5 or more, right?
Yeah. So from the loan perspective, that would be considered a commercial. So if you're going out getting financing, you can potentially get a commercial loan on it because it's 5 units. So they're looking more at the asset rather than the actual owner and their ability to service it. Right. It depends on the lender, but for the most part, 5 units and up, it's considered commercial, and then 4 and under is considered residential.
So let's start with number 1, basements. How much does legal conversion cost on average?
Yeah, that's
Put 'em
always
on the
the
spot.
Hey,
that's
it's all about
always
the numbers here.
Yeah, that's always the
gotta make
the
sense.
golden question, right?
Yeah.
And I'll start off by saying it depends, but at the same time,
consultant
I can
answer.
but I can say that with some of my past clients and their experience is that for a typical basement, let's say a bungalow, a lot of the ones that we work with, you have 800 to 1,000 square foot footprint. It's coming in anywhere between $125 to $150 per square foot, roughly.
Okay.
So if it's 1,000 square feet, then you're looking at 125 to 150,000 pre-tax.
Okay.
And that's sort of a sliding scale between how much you need to do with, let's say, utilities and plumbing, anything additional would be probably on the higher on the 150 side. Whereas if you don't have to do as much as that, it might be closer to the 125, and that's more of a mid-range durable finish rental grade, right? Not lowest quality, but also not like luxury, right? That's kind of what our typical clientele would go for.
So with investors or even homeowners, it seems like this with all these changes, it could be a good revenue stream once you convert the basement or even the laneway house, because most of the homeowners, they may or may not have a mortgage or maybe a small mortgage. They can refinance their home and convert these as dwellings, and increase the cash flow because it's better, collecting the rent because the rental market's doing quite well as opposed to just leaving it in the house or at the bank, which is not generating any cash flow.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, right? Like, as the market has kind of slowed down the past year or so because of interest rates, we all know that. I've had a lot of clients where, they haven't made any additional acquisitions, but they've taken their property and say, I have a certain amount of equity here. I have the space, I have a basement, I have a backyard. I don't want to acquire another property. I don't want to be over leveraged, but I do have the capital and I do have the space available. So now's the time that, we're actually still pretty busy with that stuff. And then their idea is exactly what you mentioned, is that they want to be able to get that cash flow, right? So they're utilizing their basement, they're utilizing their backyard to build this thing. It's gonna maybe be a 10-15 year payoff. A lot of them, they're accessing home equity. Let's say it gets paid off in 10-15 years, they're going to hold it long term. After that, it just becomes a capital asset that just keeps giving them rent monthly, and there's no additional expenses, right, other than like maintenance.
I thought of a question. Is there any particular difference between laneway house and a coach house? Because they kind of throw around the term interchangeably.
Yeah.
Is it same thing?
Yeah, I would say a coach house would be, you can probably call that a ADU or a garden suite, whereas laneway specifically has a laneway access, right? So there's many different names: coach house, carriage house, yeah.
It's confusing for a lot of consumers, even for us realtors too, right?
Yeah,
but they're essentially the same. Like if you say like a laneway versus like a garden suite,
when you see it, you'll know what it is. But like when they describe it, it's going to be like confusing.
Yeah. The most accurate technical term would be ADU, which is accessory dwelling unit, or detached accessory dwelling unit. That's kind of the standard that a lot of the municipalities use, as well as throughout the U.S., because it's actually blowing up quite a bit in the U.S. as well now. And I see this as an opportunity for professionals like yourselves to be very familiar with the process, be familiar with how this can benefit from a financial perspective, right? The ADUs, the multi-units, and that can really give professionals a competitive advantage when they're finding a property for their client, to say, not only is this house going to be suitable for you, but it can also become an income generator. Or if you have a large multi-generational family and you all want to be close but still have that separation, this
have
is
your kids in
great
there,
option.
Great, yeah. Like in-laws or something like that.
Yeah.
So Andy, you're well traveled. Who's leading the way? Which country for ADUs?
You sound so like CNN, man.
Well, it's I know Andy spends time in Asia, the US, and of course Canada. So it's interesting to see who's leading the way.
Larry King here.
Yeah, okay. You're pretty good.
So just because I have the hard-hitting questions.
I mean, so Andy, where have you traveled? Like mostly.
Yeah, let's start there first, man.
Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah, you guys are not giving me the T-ball questions.
Let me ask you a question, Andy.
Let me ask
We don't have to talk about traveling here. Let's talk about. So have you explored the idea of using prefab homes, container homes, or that kind of material for additions, ADUs?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of tiny homes I see then.
Yes.
Yes.
Is that?
I've explored that for many years, and I'm still exploring it. I believe it's the future, but I still feel like we're early for that.
I think so. It's still so new.
Yeah. It's still like prefab and manufactured homes, they've been around for decades, like literally like 50, 60, 70 years, right? It's never been able to reach parity with on-site building in terms of costs.
Oh,
See,
really?
But that's the misconception, right? You're buying prefab; it should be cheaper.
it's like a Lego,
less
right?
laborsome to put together. You're just dropping it on a foundation, and then you're building from there, from the inside out.
Yeah, so I'll explain why in my opinion, it's not mature yet, but I do feel that we're going to be headed there very soon because of a lot of changes in the industry, a lot of
3D
more
printing
automation
and stuff. Yeah.
more robotics, more AI. And also one thing that a lot of people don't talk about is because of policy changes, it will encourage more locality. So for example, if I wanted to build one right now in Toronto, there's only a very limited number of prefab builders in Ontario. And a lot of them, they'll ship it from Quebec. But with the policies changing, you're going to see more specialized people that are going to be doing it, more local. There's going to be more factories that are going to be building it. So one of the big costs from prefab factory built is transportation and local expertise to be able to assemble it all together. And so you're going to see with the demand because of policy changes and the requirement for more density, that it's going to be more competitive and they're going to be able to bring the cost down. And with things like automation and robotics, that's really going to help reduce the cost as well in the coming years and decade, in my opinion, right? The reason why it hasn't is because of those reasons that I mentioned, is that like facility costs. Because a lot of people think, hey, you know what? We build cars in factories. Why can't we build houses? There's a lot of costs associated with building a house that is not factored in when you're talking about it, right? Like you're thinking facility costs, like a lot of overhead, right? Like, all types of things. Whereas on a site, that's basically your factory on a site. So over, the past century of home building, it's been it's been a lot more cost effective to do it on site. But again, I think that's going to change, and it's very interesting. We're talking to a lot of people. And it's not as simple as just building it and then just kind of, dropping it with a crane. That's only 50% of it, like that built. The other part is, how do you do a proper foundation? How do you connect the services and utilities? That's actually a very high cost and very labor intensive as well, right? So that's the other side of it.
Oh, but you know what? Like I heard that a lot of places in the US, they don't even have basements. It's a very Canadian thing to have foundation, basements. I have some friends like in Texas. They're like, we just have the main floor and the second floor, and they just plop it on.
Yeah, it's true. Like there's less basements in the US, especially in the southern portion because of the weather basically, right? So you have to have, you need frost protection. So when you have a basement, the frost only goes down 4 feet.
Yeah.
So if your basement is like 8 feet or 7 feet, the frost doesn't get underneath. But if you don't have a proper, at least a 4-foot foundation, water can get underneath, freezes, and it causes the house to heave. Right?
That's
the primary reason why we have we don't necessarily have to have it, but we still need like a 4-foot foundation. So a lot of the garden suites that we work on, we don't have basements, but we still need to have a proper foundation. So even though there's no basement, it's still pretty substantial.
Houses that would, like, I guess, crawl space. So some houses have crawl space, right? So that would be about 4 feet deep or deeper, you're saying?
Correct. Yeah. Absolutely. But I want to answer Woody's question about forget the travel stuff, because he actually had a very serious question that I wanted to address, right? Forget the travel thing. But where have we seen it the most? And like when you talk about places like in Asia and Europe, like those cities have been around for like centuries, and they built them very organically, kind of like how we built our downtowns in North America, like 200, 300, 400 years ago when I guess the Europeans first settled. Is that it was very organic. It was very based on kind of wealth that was built incrementally over time. Whereas in the past, I would say, since post-war, the development pattern has been very focused on suburban sprawl. And so since the 1940s, 1950s, you see this suburban expansion in places like all over Canada and US. You have the same development pattern in Australia. I haven't been there, but I understand that their zoning policies are the same. So that was a time of extreme abundant wealth in the 50s when oil was super cheap, right? But now we know energy is an issue. We know that all the countries are pretty much broke, and densification, one of the reasons really is the cities, they need to create revenue. So if you already have existing infrastructure of roads, sewers, utilities, why not just build more on that? So, to answer your questions, where have we seen these? We don't really see them in places like Asia and Europe because they don't have that same development pattern. Although some places they are kind of like spreading out and doing the suburban experiment. But here in North America, we're starting to see that urban planners recognize the importance of reducing the sprawl and increasing density for, basically for financial stability.
Okay.
But it's very challenging, right? Because you have like a lot of neighbors and NIMBYism, which is like not in my backyard.
Yeah.
NIMBY.
That's
Yeah.
right. NIMBY is my favorite word. These guys didn't even know what NIMBY was like 2 weeks ago.
Now we know.
So Canada and the US, because we have this urban sprawl,
Yep.
we are leading it because we have a problem to solve.
Exactly. Yeah, there is a problem to solve, and some cities are more progressive. So within North America, I would say that the West Coast has led the charge. So BC, Alberta, California, Washington, Oregon, like those places have put policies like in the past 10, 15 years to allow these types of things. And out in the East, being more conservative, we're starting to see it. So that's why Ontario was late. But because with a city like Toronto being, the highest density in Canada, being the most multicultural and highest priced housing market, it's the natural progression that we are kind of like on the next, on path to kind of follow these policies as well. And we're still very early, and which is why I encourage, all professionals, whether you're a realtor, whether you're a contractor, mortgage professional, architect, designer, if you can specialize in this, I think that the opportunities are just huge.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense to do, especially in Toronto where we have this housing crisis. We definitely need more housing. The only concern would be because the city is not charging development fees, which is good. It entices people to start doing this, but the city's not really getting revenue from it. So I guess the argument is, who's going to pay for this? Are they going to raise the property taxes? So I think that was one concern, but I still think the way we're doing it now is good. But time will tell, right? So
yeah, that's a tough question.
It's very tough, yeah.
And I think the idea is that if you allow people to build it and have less hurdles, because even without development charges, people aren't building, like you don't see these popping up everywhere because it's very expensive to build.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of hurdles, right? So development fees is just one hurdle. You still have, like right now, right? You have rates being so high, it's hard to get the money.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You still have, you have to acquire the property, right? Who can afford a property in Toronto, right? So there's so many hurdles already. To add another, like to basically remove one, really just makes it a little bit easier, but not a whole lot easier.
Yeah,
and the
I
idea
totally
is
agree.
that if you build more density over time, you have more people there, there's more economic activity. So it's more of a long-term financial play than kind of instantly getting that, the development fees, right? Because at the end of the day, the city's books, their assets and liabilities is not just kind of in one area, it's across the whole city.
It's everything.
So they're making more money in the high density areas, right? If you look at their revenue, it's all in the high density downtown areas, right? And it's a liability in all the suburbs because they're costing so much replacing the repairing the roads and things like that, whereas they're getting so much more revenue from property taxes and rent in all the high density areas. So the idea, I think, long term is property taxes and economic growth in those high density areas rather than development fees to offset that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I'm actually curious. So when you mentioned about all these hurdles, is there any room for any type of foreign money? Because right now they've actually stopped foreign buyers from buying holding properties. But what if local homeowners or even companies do joint ventures with foreign money, and it would be a win-win situation because the foreign money they're not owning it, but they may invest into a company where they're able to create these dwellings and then split the profits with the homeowners.
Yeah, that I guess that
It
makes
makes
sense.
a lot of sense.
Yeah,
I'm not a
that's
legal
possible.
expert, and I don't want to advocate anything that's not legal, but I think it makes a lot of sense if we don't have the funding available, and if it makes sense that this becomes a product that is highly valuable, to a potential buyer or to renters, right? We have so many renters that need a place. but we need the capital to build it. I think it makes a lot of sense to have foreign investment, and maybe that might be an option, right? So joint ventures. There's a lot of different models too. There's like co-ownership models now where multiple parties would pool funds together and acquire a property and then do the legal split, and then they may live in one unit, so it effectively becomes like a small apartment building or a small condo. They own a portion, so that at least they can get equity building rather than just renting, right? So this is something like this is very good for that as well. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a good idea.
just thinking outside the box.
Nice.
So you were telling us for a basement conversion, you're looking between 100 to 125. What about
125 to 150 is kind of what I heard last from the contractor.
Okay, so 125 to 150.
Yeah.
What about a laneway housing or garden suite?
Yeah, that's tougher. I actually did a video not too long ago on the garden suite that I built in Brantford, Ontario. And that was a 630 square foot 2-bedroom garden suite. And I managed it myself, and it actually came almost close to 300,000 to build.
Oh, that's not bad.
275.
That's not bad at all.
Yeah. So
For 600 square feet though.
yeah.
Yeah.
650
$500 a square foot ish.
Yeah. So it's not cheap for sure. Putting in a structure and a foundation is definitely not the low hanging fruit, I would say.
Right.
But it makes a lot of sense in Toronto because of the land value,
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
So if you have a plot of land, you have a lot and you have a large backyard, you just kind of have to look at the numbers and see where it makes sense. So I'll give you another example. So I had a client that I helped her with her main house. It was actually in I think Seatonville. You know where Seatonville is? Around kind of Koreatown Annex area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's within walking distance to I think Christie Station, like a 5-10 minute walk to Christie Station. So she had this large single family home. I helped her with the conversion to 3 units, and she also built a laneway house at the same time.
Oh, wow.
It was a 3-bedroom laneway house,
Wow.
and I think the cost was it came in around 500,000. It was 2 stories, 3 bedrooms. And I think she's renting it out for around $4,500 a month.
Oof.
So, when you look at it, I mean, that's a big cost for that rent. Maybe it makes sense. Maybe it doesn't in the short term. But long term, I think it makes a lot of sense because you just kind of have to look at for $500,000, what else can I get in that area?
It's true.
Yeah.
Nothing. You can't get a condo anymore.
Yeah.
I checked. I actually checked. So in that corner where Honest Ed's used to be,
Yeah.
Yep.
a studio apartment, so doesn't even have 1 bedroom. A studio apartment was going for $650. This was about a year ago when we were looking into this, right? So she got a 3-bedroom house for $500,000. The magic is in the fact that she had this free land there, right? That was in her backyard.
Even this the studio rent can't get
That's not even
4,500.
close.
No way.
It's like
rent house is
2,000.
It's a
You're gonna get, like,
3-bedroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably get like $2,200, $2,300 for
Yeah.
rent.
23
So you're getting
versus
double the rent.
45.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's double the rent, and the purchasing price is lower.
Actually, I have a question about intensification. Like because you're talking about adding more units to one house and you're having a lot more residents into, a specific area. Because several years back, I was hearing about, problems that people were living on Charles Street East, like the buildings there, because they're building Casa 1, Casa 2, Casa 3, etc. And they were having water pressure issues in those specific buildings. So building like multiple units like that and creating more density, right? And not really improving the development charges or not really charging more development charges. Have you seen things like that occur where water pressure is lower or I don't know, services are going to be impacted?
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. And, we don't have to make any kind of arbitrary statements on whether or not it's going to be supported, because a lot of times when we go in for these applications and when we have to go through a minor variance and we have to go to the committee of adjustments and say we want to add these units, there's always going to be a neighbor that's going to come out and say that how are you going to handle all these services? We can't handle it. And then that's a very simple way we have a very simple way to answer. It's it's not up to you. It's not up to me. It's up to the engineer. Here's the chart. And based on this area, this is what it can support. And based on our 4 units, this is what the requirements are going to be based on the number of plumbing fixtures, number of fixture units. And because of that, we will need a 1 inch or 1 1/4 inch. And is that area going to support it? Yes or no? So it's a very technical answer whether or not it can support it, right? So to answer your question, it is a concern, but in the vast majority of cases, especially in the more suburban locations, it's not an issue
Right.
at all because
Right.
there's so much infrastructure that was there, like, for just very few housing units, right?
Mhm.
Specifically something like water, it's actually pretty simple. You just have to increase the size of the pipe and you'll
Yeah.
get more water.
Makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
sense. It's just the thing that I was thinking about, because if we're not increasing the development charges, or if we're not doing anything with development
Mhm.
charges, then right now may be kind of early, right? Because not a lot of people are doing them yet.
Mhm.
But as it increases, I think that may be something that or I guess the city needs to really consider, right? Or the province.
Yeah, a lot of this is actually a lot of the expenses for the infrastructure upgrades are actually borne by the developer.
Okay.
So if I have to increase the size of the pipe going to the house because I have more units now, I have to pay for the portion, potentially the legal, the public portion and the private portion,
Oh,
Yeah, okay.
right? And it might be
Oh,
several
that's
$1,000s.
Okay.
So and then if I have to increase my service, let's say from 200 amps to 400 amps, Toronto Hydro might say we can only support 200 amps here. If you want 400, you have to pay for the increase of the transformer.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
So a lot of it is borne by the developer already, and it's not necessarily
certain things that I
Yeah.
guess
Okay.
people who are building these multi-unit or increasing the unit sizes of their homes, something to consider, right, in the future.
Yeah.
It's an added expense, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah.
So for somebody who's considering a conversion, either basement or garden suite, laneway housing, what's the biggest challenges that they've faced besides for the money part?
I think navigating the city,
Mm-hmm.
it's tricky, right?
Yeah.
Because like city have their own language in terms of what things need to be dealt with. So that's what we do for our clients is that, we will deal with that for them. So if we have to speak to the planning department or the building department, and then it goes to forestry because there's a tree that needs to be, altered or removed, or if there's, a parking issue or an engineering issue, those are things that, we can help. But a lot of people that do it themselves, obviously going through that process, you're going to learn a lot, but it is challenging because, the cities, they have a certain type of language that they use, and it's
Mhm.
very difficult for just your average homeowner, right? So I think that the municipalities, they can do a better job of making the information more accessible in terms of being understandable by a layman rather than like overly technical. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges is just kind of navigating that process with the city.
I was doing research and I was on your Instagram, suite_additions, SUITE.
Thanks.
My pleasure.
Not SWEET.
That's an actual
Sweet animals.
That's an actual website.
That's something Rich looks at nighttime when he's by himself.
He goes on Instagram and starts searching SWEET.
Thanks, Woody.
There is a City of Toronto document you mentioned that helps an individual that's interested in making a conversion, right?
Actually, I think the one document that you're referring to is from the province.
Oh, from the
Yeah,
province.
adding a
okay.
second unit. So
Yeah.
it's like 30 pages and it highlights like with diagrams what the requirements are. So it's actually good for people, when they're house hunting and just kind of checking, using that as a checklist to say, is this going to have the proper room sizes, proper egress windows.
Mhm.
We also have a checklist on our website that people can download for free as well.
How about
Suiteadditions.com.
Spelled SUITE.
So how about school enrollments? There shouldn't be a huge impact for this type of development, but because we often hear like new condos when they're built,
Yeah.
certain schools
Yeah.
and districts they won't accept kids
Mhm.
because of
Overcrowding.
From
the intensity,
Yeah.
intensification, right?
Yeah.
you
So
can-
the interesting thing about Toronto, and Ryerson actually did a detailed report on this, is that you have net increase in population, but it's all along the high density corridors with all the condo developments
Mhm.
where you see that growth. And, schools and any other public amenities like community centers and things like that, they're overcrowded because those areas are already overcrowded. However, when you get into the neighborhoods zones, which is kind of the single family neighborhoods, detached, semi-detached townhouses, there's actually a population decline
Yes.
that you may not be aware of. So there's a big issue with empty bedrooms because you have a lot of these places that, throughout kind of like the latter part of the 20th century, 60s, 70s, and 80s, you had these people that were raising families there, and now they're empty nesters, and they have these big houses, and they don't want to leave because of the house value. Families cannot get into that neighborhood because of the accessibility from the cost. And there's actually a reduction in school populations in those areas, which is why we, leading to closures. So on one hand, you have these high density areas that are just overcrowded, and then they're building these portables and everything.
Right.
And then on the other hand, you have schools that are actually like under enrolled to the point of closure. So there's Ryerson actually has a report. Ryerson actually has a report actually outlining all of this. Perfect example is my neighborhood. So I live in Scarborough in Agincourt, and it's all like single family houses in the suburbs. I advocate for it. I don't mind when there's a lot of Asian families there where, they will rent out rooms to individual people who, they can't afford a house on their own, but, they don't have kids. And in my daughter's school, it's actually under enrolled. Like there's only like 120 people in her school, in a public school that's like can support probably like 500-600 kids.
Wow.
Right. And then they don't have enough teachers. And then like, the one teacher's doing like grade 4, 5, and 6 all at once.
Wow.
It's kind of
that's a lot of pressure.
yeah. So this is why it just makes perfect sense for those suburban areas to have that more, have that density. Whether it's 2 units, 3 units, garden suite, makes a lot of sense.
Interesting. Actually, I had a question for you because it just leads to the question, right? Because when you make all these modifications to a home, right, from a realtor's perspective, we want to know what the value of the home is going to be, right? So based on your experience with your clients who have done all these modifications, have they gone back and done an appraisal and see what that property is actually worth? Or has it increased? Like, I don't know how much it would increase value by.
Sure. Yeah. I would still say the vast majority of our clients have done really just the duplex, and they would, do the duplex and then go and refinance it, get that higher value, extract equity, and maybe purchase another property. Now we're seeing that, but they may not take that equity to purchase another property. They may take that equity to build like a garden suite or like do a third unit, sort of take a phased approach. Right. So, it depends. For the 2 units, they've been around for like a decade now in terms of the legality of it.
Yeah.
So banks pretty much recognize them. They see the value. They take into consideration the rental income as part of their underwriting. So they do increase the value there. Garden suites, it's still very new, and there's not a lot of comparables. So we don't have as much data on that yet. I would say in the next few years, we're going to start seeing more.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you were looking up Laneway housing in Toronto.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
There's quite a bit. But I see very, very few garden suites. So
yeah,
maybe
I couldn't find a garden suite.
I think the first one just got built like a couple of weeks ago. Like
first one
got completed because it's only been around a year.
Yeah.
We actually have a few that are in progress, and I think one just got. But there's like 100 permits open, so you're gonna start seeing them.
But what about like mailing address? So if you do have a laneway house, if you have a thing, like you have your main house, which is like, let's say, we all live in, and then we have a tenant, where did the mail go to?
G
to
for
you?
garden.
Is it A, B, C, D, E?
I don't know. Like unit A,
B, C, D,
unit
Yeah. So some cities will have an address system where they might call, like they may add an R for rear unit or something like that. Like that's what Hamilton does. They have a R. I don't think
differentiate. It doesn't all get clumped up to one mailbox.
Yeah, but I think for Toronto, I don't know if they have anything for garden suites yet, but for
it seems like a good system though. Like at least put a letter beside it so that it doesn't.
A lot of times it's just up to the homeowner to say unit 1, unit 2, right? And then they'll have a mailbox there.
Yeah.
Now, if it's done legally and you have a community mailbox, you can actually call Canada Post to say, here's my permit. I have this done legally. And then they may give you an extra mailbox at the community. But if it's just the mailbox on the house, then you would just do like unit 1, unit 2.
Just split it up.
And then you would just ask the your tenants when they give out their address, just put unit 1, unit 2 there, right?
That's fair. Yeah.
Once in a while, mail gets mixed up.
It's not like
that's kind of how you deal with it. And then also garbage, kind of as a related topic, as well.
So they have their own bins. They have their own bins.
That depends on the city.
Oh,
Just kind of curious, going on what Richard was saying. When when you work with these clients. So obviously, when you do an addition, any kind of renovation, if they do it through paperwork, right, the paper trail, clearly impact triggers an assessment, right? So what have you seen in terms of property taxes going up after your renovations for some of your clients?
Yeah, I've had that question, for the past like 8-9 years since I've been doing this, and I would say that for the most part, it hasn't been a big impact.
Okay.
In terms of, we all know that the impact assessments are much lower than the actual
Yeah.
market,
Always.
Assessed value is not
right?
Yeah.
It's
And
different, it's different from market value.
yeah, I think the idea is that there have been incidences where I've heard where MPAC would contact the city to find out like number of units,
Mhm.
but there's actually not a lot of good communication, and a lot of times MPAC just assumes it's a single family home. But I've heard of some cases where MPAC did advise, like were advised that this is a multiple unit, and then they would appraise it higher. But even at that, it's actually not true market value. So is it a concern for taxes, property taxes going forward? I would say expect it to be, because that's one of the ways that the city needs more revenue, right? Is increased property taxes. So higher density means more units, more property taxes. But is that a reason not to do it? I would
seems
say
fair.
It's still worth it to do
Well,
it.
it's still worth it because you're getting
Yeah.
the rent. I mean, rental rates are ridiculous right
Yeah.
now. Even when I was
Rental
looking up
value,
the
because
Because you're
laneway,
not paying like a separate unit. Like, for example, if you buy like a studio or one bedroom, you're paying
Yeah.
property tax for that alone.
Mhm,
Here, you're
exactly.
just adding on to yours.
Well, it's all gonna be like positive cash flow. Essentially,
exactly.
It's gonna add a lot more cash
Yeah.
flow to your pocket.
tons. Yeah.
Because I was looking at the Laneway Homes, and they're like literally like any other unit, like 2,300 and up.
No difference.
No,
in
no,
the
I was
house.
just researching. I was just
Yeah.
researching this. Oh, come on. No, I was looking it up just for our purpose here, and and it was like literally the cheapest one I found was $2,300, and that
Okay.
was about.
Wait, can you actually buy one?
You can't buy it by itself because it's not. You can't.
It's not.
separate
It's
it.
not
like part of a
separate.
property,
You're-
yeah.
You're not allowed to separate.
Well, not yet. Maybe maybe
Yeah.
one day.
Maybe,
Who knows?
yeah.
There's US actually in BC there you can potentially like separate into a condo.
Oh.
And same in Texas as well. In Austin, you can actually separate it into like a homeowners association where it's like a
Game
condo.
changer. Wow.
So
Oh, no
I
way.
see those
Yeah.
types of things coming down the pike
Yeah.
in the few years, right? As you know, things become
Yeah.
more and more unaffordable.
It's true.
But yeah, a lot of them just look like regular houses. Especially
Yeah.
you got those corner
Mhm.
lots.
They're
As you build them, you're like, wow, this.
No,
Yeah.
honestly, some of the photos look really good, man.
Oh, yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
these are actually pretty impressive. Because there's some are 2 stories too.
Yeah.
They're like
Yeah.
1,100 square feet.
They're way better than
Wow.
condos.
Do you guys know-
just
Yeah.
value wise? It's so much better.
Do you know
right?
Lanescape? Have you heard of
Yeah, they're a
Lanescape?
builder,
Yeah.
right? They
Well,
do this stuff.
they started doing building, but it's run by a guy named Craig, and he has
Okay.
got a couple partners, and
Yeah.
he's an architect.
Yeah.
Really good. Like all his designs are amazing. You should get him on the show.
Okay.
Okay.
And he can talk more about kind of that policy and laneway. We're kind of in the same business, but his designs are incredible. Like a lot of the ones you've seen online on Toronto Life, a lot of them are
his, right?
his.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
Lanescape.
Okay.
That's cool.
They're
Yeah.
probably like LEED certified.
Yeah, it's crazy. Mine, they look like sheds. The one I do. Everybody just want to cut costs, right? I'm like, that's fine. Like,
Yeah.
I do like the way how you mentioned as a homeowner, you know, you either build a laneway house or you invest in condos. Because investing in another property is the other option, right? But everything's getting so expensive now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with the cost of borrowing.
Mhm.
So if you have
Getting a mortgage is tough too.
yeah,
So it's-
exactly.
Yeah.
But just having a cheaper option, building it on your own land, don't worry about development charges. No,
I think it's a lot easier too because you don't have to apply for a new mortgage to do this project. You're just drawing equity just to do this, right?
yeah, if you have cash lying around too, I guess, yeah, it's easier.
Well, most people do have some cash if they're considering this route
Yeah.
anyways, right?
But the downside is, you know, it's a lot of work. Obviously, you gotta like monitor the.
well,
the
that's why
project.
you get someone like Andy.
Yeah, that's
you
true.
don't do it.
Yeah,
I actually, yeah. What's
Sweetadditions.com.
I think you mentioned this in the beginning. SUITE. SUITE, not SWETT.
you guys should check out that other one. It's actually a pretty clean website.
Woody,
Um,
it's on you. man.
No, actually, I was gonna ask. I forget if you actually touched on it or not in the beginning, but what's the turnaround time? So from the start to end timeline, is it? I know you said 10 to 12 weeks for
That's
the
just permits.
Yeah.
right? But what about from like start of consultation to
Right.
to completion?
I would say a very rough time frame. A lot of it depends on, you know, the size and scope, you know, your contractor, you know, how easy to access the site. But I think something reasonable would be 9 months to a year
Oh,
Okay.
process,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Like, you
like
know, a lot-
building regular
yeah.
homes.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you know, building a house. A lot of people would say
Well, it's just a
a
smaller
year,
home,
not
right?
including, you know, the whole approvals thing. If it's not like,
Yeah.
you know, if
The
it's not,
construction part is way
Because Laneway
Yeah.
Home is like building a house. It's
Yeah.
just
It
smaller,
is, yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, when you
it's
talk-
more difficult in a lot of cases because of
Yeah.
access.
Okay, I've been thinking of this one question for a while now. So you said that some houses can split up into 4 units plus the laneway house or the garden suite.
Mhm.
How big of a house do you need to split your house into 4 units?
Yeah, so this is where, the creativity kicks in depending on the site,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like obviously the bigger the house, the easier it is, right? Like if you had a giant,
3,000
mansion,
square foot.
3,000, 4,000 square foot home in the suburbs, then
problem.
it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
But then when you have a
2,000.
two-story home, so I'm actually working on a project right now. It's actually my own house
Okay.
in on the Danforth,
Okay.
where it's a two-story home with a basement.
Okay.
So the goal is to have 3 levels plus a basement,
Yep.
so 4 units in total.
Oh, 3 levels. So you're
We're-
adding an additional
we're adding,
story.
Yeah, so right now we just submitted to the city for a zoning bylaw review to
Okay.
see if we are violating any bylaws, and then we have a 2-car garage in the back that we want to turn into a 1-bedroom unit.
Oh, okay.
So if
you're
we're able to get the
converting
fi-
that completely. Okay.
Yeah, so if we're able to get the 5, then we're exempt from development charges. We're potentially eligible for the CMHC financing and no parking requirements. So yeah, we're gonna give that a shot.
But you
and
have to
see.
build an addition. Like
Yes.
you have to build an additional 8 feet, 9 feet.
Yeah, something like that. Sorry, the question was
How big
yeah,
the
so,
house was.
Yeah, so it's gonna
how
be
do you
like
split up a 2-story house, right?
yeah, it gets tricky. Like it gets complicated, right? Because you have to create like entrances, you have to make
Yeah.
sure there's proper fire separation. So it's not an easy task, and it's definitely something that you want to have a.
It's not
an
every house
experience.
that can do it.
Yeah, some houses just doesn't work, right? Like
If you go to like Markham, Richmond Hill,
Honestly, you'd be surprised
tough.
because I have a client's home
Yeah.
that I've been helping rent out. It's a 4-plex.
Oh.
And it doesn't, when you look from the outside, it actually looks like a regular home.
like a
but it's
regular
got-
detached 2-story home.
Yeah, it looks like a 2-story home.
Okay.
But they got a unit upstairs. They got a unit in the main level. And then they have a unit in the basement. And then
Okay.
they have an addition in the back of the house.
Oh.
So it's a legal 4-plex.
Really?
It's,
Very nice.
it's
So how big
crazy.
is that additional piece in the back?
It's not
Is it
that
one
big.
bedroom?
I would say, I was looking at that unit. I would say it's about 500, maybe 450
So
square
legally,
foot.
it has to have its own washroom, kitchen.
It's got its own kitchen. It's got
windows,
its own bathroom,
separate entrance,
bedroom, living space.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like
I see a
it's-
lot of creative units too.
Where's that?
This is at Major Mac and Young.
No way.
Yeah.
Richmond Hill.
That's right.
Okay.
Actually, there's several houses like that there. It's
Nice.
insane. Like if you were to look closely, it's in Crosby. If you want to know,
Mm.
So the question is, legal?
it's legal. Proper permits. And they have a huge garden suite. They have a huge garden backyard, and
Yeah.
they can probably do an addition too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
But I don't think she's gonna do anything like that.
She doesn't live there, right?
No. It's all rented.
It's all
Yeah.
rental income. Okay.
Yeah.
Also, like garages are an option as well, whether it's attached or detached.
But you know what?
So even attached garages that are 1 or 2, you can do a nice 1-bedroom, 2 bedrooms.
I see that as an issue though if she doesn't live there, because then she's gonna get cap gains on the entire property that she has. If she lives there, at least
Only
there's some
when you
shelter.
sell.
Yeah.
Well,
If I had a 4-plex, I'd be keeping it forever. Revenue generating. Yeah.
You know what? Honestly, it's a huge revenue generator for
Yeah.
her. So
Yeah.
it works for her right now.
yeah.
But
She's
we-
retired and she's still
But when
manages it.
if and when she does sell, that becomes something.
Well, I guess that's
because
something she'll have
it
to worry
was
about
it
then.
was a principal at one point.
No, it wasn't.
Oh, it's never a principal.
Never a principal.
So it was going to be good tax anyways. So.
Yeah.
I think even if you live in it, if you have a 4-unit or 3-unit,
Yeah.
I think that there's a threshold in which case CRA would say, well,
They-
you know what, a
there's
portion of this is going to
charging
be
that portion.
Yeah, a portion of because if you let's say you have a basement apartment, I think you're okay for the most part. But if you start having 3 units, 4 units, CRA is going to look at that and say, well, you're
This
only
is
living
business.
25% of
It's a
it. This rest of it is
Yeah.
business. There's probably going to be some additional taxes. Like you're not going to. I
Right.
don't think you're going to get principal residence exemption on the entire thing.
The thing is, the CRA doesn't know. Like, I don't know how you like when you sell it. Like, what's the category? It's still going to be on impact and whatnot. It's still going to say it's a single detached home. But
Well,
then-
actually, it says
no.
4 separate living contained units.
That's the
That's on the impact.
so when you legally do it, then you have to change not the zoning, but like the description of the home, right?
Well, it's going to be on your listing, right? If you have a legal 4-unit, would you not put that on your listing when you're selling,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Or would
So
you try
instead
to
of-
hide it?
Yeah, it wouldn't read single family
Okay,
residential. It would actually read
4
separate contained units.
self-contained units.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
okay.
exactly
Okay.
Yeah. So we are running on up to time now.
Wow.
Are there any last questions?
Any final thoughts?
No, I don't have any.
I don't know.
How about Andy? Any final comments?
No, I think we covered a lot. I appreciate you guys having me on, and hopefully we'll see you guys doing more of
Sweet.
these.
How do you spell
And,
your business name again?
what do you
We'll link it. We'll link it.
Sweetedition.com. It'll
With an
be
S,
in
right? With
it'll
an
be
S?
in the description.
We also have a YouTube channel, so we put quite a bit of effort putting together some educational videos. So
Oh,
it
I think I
is-
saw one of your videos. Very well put together.
Yeah, thanks. We have
That's
we
great.
have a couple of guys that are pretty good with
Oh,
editing and
okay.
stuff like that. So and shooting and editing. So
And what's the name of the YouTube channel?
youtube.com/Sweet Editions.
Awesome.
SUITE.
Perfect.
Just want to write it on the
Thank
board.
you. That's what we'll do next time.
Go on the YouTubes.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for
All right,
coming.
thanks, guys.
man.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.